Right. So, like I was saying, we're going to have a lot to go through this week. And basically, we'll be setting up a pipeline using GitHub Actions, and it it will cover everything you need for the assessment. I'm not even going to say it should, it will. You definitely know it will. Okay. So, we're going to walk through using GitHub Actions to set up some resources in AWS using Terraform will then give you the option of how to set up your EC2, like setting up dependencies and whatnot. Our recommendation will be to use Ansible, and we'll go over that more on day 3. So this Thursday with Preston. But if you want, you could also go the route of using actions for SSHing or SCPing, and that'll be covered tomorrow as well. We'll also go over setting up a testing environment so we can run some tests for our Flask application, our Python Flask application. And by the end of this, you should have a lightweight full stack application deployed on an EC2 that is accessible. And the idea is that with all this repetition and practice, you'll essentially get the muscle memory down, and then you could apply this to future projects, maybe even other tech stacks where we're not just using Flask and a simple node front end. But that's the gist of it. So go ahead, get your environments ready. I've also included in today's README a link to a starting point, and that's not even the right README. Oh, this is the wrong repo entirely. Sorry. Let me switch over. Okay. Yes, we are on week 16. Well, we technically started the pipeline a few weeks ago, which is probably why this is out of date. But we pushed back day 1 to week 14 so that we could squeeze in some additional topics in between, right? So monitoring with CloudWatch, with Elk Stack, and I believe Chandra went over writing a Docker Compose file for Elasticsearch, Kibana, and Logstash last Saturday. So that's something that you can throw into your Compose for your project as well. We are now going to just review the setup of this infrastructure, and we're going to go over setting up some testing inside that environment. And we have provided this starting point, this foundation. So get your environments ready. You could work off of this, or you could work off of a previous project. Um, One of the things I like about these tools is they allow for a lot of reusability, right? So the Terraform files, the Ansible files that you've created already can be reused over and over, um, with changes made, of course, to folder names, paths, that sort of stuff, depending on what kind of apps you're deploying, right? So that is up to you. If you want a fresh foundation, that is what, where is it? The link is in a few different places. Let me see. Okay, it might have one for sure. Okay. I see. Right. Okay, so this link actually just goes back to the lesson from week 14, like the original day 1. And here is the link for that fresh starting point. Okay. So this is an example of what your starting folder directories will look like. Okay. And you'll have that here if you want to use this.
Hey, Julius, where did you? Sorry, you clicked on so many. I'm trying to figure out where this one is.
Sure.
Which link was this?
Yeah, let's let me back up. Okay, so we go to week 16 and let's go to day 1 and let's go to our actually both the assignment repo and the second lesson will have this link. But yes, I'm in the second lesson 2 dash project setup. And if we scroll down a bit from here, there is a link to that starting point. And the assignment that you'll see in all three repos today, tomorrow, and Thursday, that is a link to this. It basically is repeating everything that I'm saying right now and also has a link to that starting point. Yeah. So this starting point should have directories for your Flask API, your Nginx, which really is just a configuration file, and that's already provided for you with some notes on what these lines represent. So you could use this as a foundation as well for the assessment. The bulk of what's in here is going to be inside of the Flask API directory, but a lot of this is provided for you also. We've got an app.py, which has uh, basically everything your application needs to run. So we have a configuration that utilizes uh, database URL, which is going to basically connect to our Postgres container, because all of this is going to be containerized. And so we pass in these service names based on the what we put inside of Docker Compose and exactly what kind of a SQL management tool we use. In this case, this example using Postgres. And then we just pass in the port that is, well, let me back up. The database and then the port and then the database inside of um, like the Postgres database object. And we also have some other basic configuration files that aren't lines of code that aren't really going to require a lot of modification. Like all of this will essentially remain the same. All of this is basically just instantiating the various built-in classes and modules that Flask utilizes to run. You'll probably make some changes if you want to use SQLite, but SQL Alchemy should work with SQLite, so there won't be too many changes. And then here we have a prefix API because we basically want all of our routes to go to the API path, right? So if we back up a bit and we go over to our routes, we'll see that we have a few routes already, a root directory, um, a health check path um, for our flow, and some routes that our front end will connect to allow for things like the creation of users, the retrieval of users, and here we also see that we utilize Blueprint, which we import from Flask to essentially act as like a template for these API routes. And so we could reuse that instantiated blueprint over and over and over again to create these routes. Okay. We'll also need a model.
Julius.
Yeah. Yeah, what's up?
Oh, I was just curious. Are there two Python files you have um, in one file, and then what was in the other?
Oh, in the Flask API directory, yeah, we have the basic. Sorry, you're kind of breaking up. Um,
Sorry, can you hear me?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Creates the Flask API and then integrates the alchemy stuff so you can communicate with the database, and then you use decorators in the other file to
Mhm.
access this API. Okay.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
This
So yeah,
seems a little complicated, but okay.
okay. Yeah, I know we've provided like a lot of this boilerplate Flask setup, and it will be again. So for the movie data database, for example, you'll be seeing a lot of the same stuff. But I just wanted to walk through it quickly just to get some repetition in on remembering what these files are and how they connect, right? And you're exactly right. These routes are basically what connects to that API, to the Flask app itself. These are the routes that your front end will be sending requests to. Okay. And so when you go to add more routes, you could just copy paste these existing routes and expand from there. We're also importing from our models file a user, and oh, some of this needs changing. I just realized this this probably needs to be changed because we're no longer importing database from the database file because that no longer exists. I combined some files into the app.py just to make it a little simpler. So there may be some things that need changing, but we'll tweak that as we go. Okay. So we're importing from models.py. And again, right now we just have a basic user model with props for its username and an email and a primary key ID. So that's our app. And setup is pretty straightforward. You should be familiar with Python, simple Python Flask applications enough by now to be able to set up a project, set up a virtual environment, install your dependencies, and run Python commands for the various scripts like your app.py. And we'll go through a bit of that as well to run the tests that we're going to add later today. Okay, so that is our, well, that's the gist of it. I think there's still a few more things. Like I didn't really talk about the Docker files, so maybe we'll look at that as well. But there's also Docker Compose. Um, Similar to what you saw on Saturday with Chandra, we have the different parts of our application defined as services inside of this Docker Compose, right? So on Saturday, you had Elasticsearch, Kibana, Logstash. Today, we have our Postgres database, our Flask API, and our Nginx services all defined. But we probably won't be touching this too much today, so we'll see. Just want you to know what the layout is for all of this, and you should have your local environment ready. So give me a thumbs up if you're good to go. Cool. Okay. So where should we begin? Let's start by, well, actually, let's start by, and we can start with a Terraform. I was debating whether or not to. No, actually, I'm going to pull up my terminal or my VS Code. And I'll start fresh with all of you guys. So let me get a new directory up. Unless, does anyone want to see like the overall flow, like the end result? Okay.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
He sure might.
You come stuff like that. Yeah, we'll go through this super quick. Just so we have an idea of where we're headed. Okay. So I don't want to go to this directory. I'm going to go up one directory. I've been using the same Web3 demo for the past few weeks. So again, I've just been expanding on the same thing over and over. And if I do an ls, we could see a very similar setup. I've got a Docker file, a Docker Compose, my root directory. I've got a Flask API and an Nginx directory. And I have my Terraform and Ansible configurations inside of an infrastructure folder. So the end goal is to be able to automate the deployment of this, right? And so that means if we were to make a change, like let's say, I don't know, let's go to our Flask API and let's make some kind of, I don't know, an arbitrary change for now. Like let's go over to tests, maybe add a new test. Okay. So like, let's say, I don't know, I'm just going to change one of these logs. Yeah, let's just make this change. Okay, so the goal is to automate the pipeline, right? So basically, in theory, when your software engineers are releasing new features, they want to release them as fast and quickly as possible. But you, as DevOps engineers, will want to ensure the reliability of those releases so you're not stuck cleaning up after the messes that they make. So I am going to release my change. We see I have a change made, so I'm going to git add this. I'm going to git commit -m for message. So change log, and then I'm going to push to a certain directory. Let's say I was working in local development, so I'm going to push to my dev branch. And the idea is this will all be automated. So as soon as I push, the pipeline will kick off, and this app will essentially be rebuilt to incorporate my new changes. Let me think actually. I think there might be a better change to make, something that's a little more impactful. So let's just go over to Nginx, or maybe our Flask API. No, I can't because the Nginx is going to be built inside of the EC2, and it's just going to be hosting a default file. If I actually had my front end app in here, I could make a change there, and then we could see that change propagate, right? But that's not the case. So we'll have to use our imaginations. Right now, if we go to, shoot, I don't know if I have the address up. Um, we go to, what's the previous project called? I think it was called, oh shit, Web3 demo, right. If we go to the last successful run, we should have some logs showing us our IP address. And so we take that IP address, we type it in. This is our front end, right? And let's see if we can access our Flask API. So we see our Flask API. So maybe this is what we'll change. We'll go to our Flask app. And inside of our app, if we were to make a change to our routes, where we define our starting route. Oh, shoot. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's going to actually show up. We'll see. I'm going to add an exclamation point. I'm going to, again, add the changes. And I am going to, oops, did I forget to add it? That's strange. Why is it not adding? Oh, because I'm not in my root directory. Type today. All right, I'm going to add my changes. I already forget what I said. Change root. Git push origin. Now I could push to one of my branches. And the idea is once I push, it's going to rebuild all on its own, right? So git push origin, drive committed. Oh, let's see. Okay, I actually don't remember what other branches I have. So I'm just going to be pushing to API, which is what I've been using. And that's going to kick off our pipeline, right? So we go back to our project, we'll see that it is kicking off a pipeline. This pipeline is going to provision some resources. Right now, it's running Terraform init. It's going to then run some commands like an import to see if these security groups that I've defined exist. If they exist, then it will import them if they haven't been imported already. Because I'm using remote state, you could see that it knows I've already imported these resources. Then we run our Terraform plan, our Terraform apply. No changes because everything has been up and running already. We get some outputs like this public IP. And this is just basically something that helps us debug, right? Like this lets us quickly access the IP address. And we can even add some outputs to our apply that will give us the SSH command that we need, for example, just ready to go, ready to copy and paste. Got some additional optional steps. And from here, it's going to install Ansible inside of the runner, the GitHub Actions workflow environment. And inside of that playbook that it calls, it's going to step through what we've defined for it to step through. So in this case, it's going to be setting up dependencies like updating the package manager and installing Docker, things like that, things that we'll need to build the app, right? So Any questions so far? Okay. This will probably take a while. From here, it should succeed. And let's start going over one of the previous runs. The second job that I wrote is to set up and run some tests, right? So if we go back to our project and we go back to our workflow, our first job, just called provision infrastructure, which is what's running right now, does everything that we just talked through. And then this is what we'll be adding today, a very simple job for running some tests. We're going to specify a dependency on our first job. Basically, we want that first job to run and succeed before we try any of the steps here. We run a checkout, we pass in our GitHub token. This actually, I don't think it's necessary, at least not for this step. So it's there as an example for when you do need it. We set up Python. This is just for logging, just to confirm that we're in the right working directory in case you run into errors where it can't find a specific folder or something along those lines. And then we install our dependencies, just like you would locally, right? You update your package manager, you install requirements.txt. You don't really have to set up a virtual environment inside of the GitHub Actions workspace because it's an ephemeral environment anyway, right? It's going to spin up and then spin down. So there's no need for that. And then we just run PyTest, which will run all the tests in our test directory. And then what you'll be building out tomorrow and on Thursday, well, more so tomorrow, I think. And then on Thursday, you'll focus more on the playbooks, is a job for actually building and deploying, right? So far, we've paired our EC2. We've run some tests to make sure that all of our files, like our Flask API and all of that stuff, is good to go. We then package everything inside of our project into a container, which we push into the GitHub container registry. You're free to use Docker Hub if you prefer, but the registry is a little simpler because it's integrated straight into GitHub. And after we push that image, we build and push that image, we then run a playbook, which will install Docker and use that to unpack the application, the image, and to run the Docker Compose, which will spin up your database, your Flask API backend, and your Nginx served front end, and any monitoring that you might have if you decide to use Elasticsearch and Kibana and all that stuff. And that's about it. It looks like this last job did succeed. So if we go over to, nice. Okay. So I think, let's see. Okay. Yeah. So I don't really know if there's any way to see the change that we made. But it's back up, and that is, if we use our imaginations, the end goal, right? We are able to rebuild an app, integrate the updates, and deploy it all at the click of a single button. Okay, let's go back if there are any questions. Well, if there are, just toss them out. and we will switch over to our new project. Shoot, what was it called? Nope. Okay, yeah, that should be right. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is set up our, can someone tell me?
Terraform
Is it
file,
Okay, I heard Terraform and then I heard something else.
workflow,
Workflow. Okay,
get ignored.
okay. We could do that. Anyone else think we should start somewhere else?
repo maybe?
Okay, what do you mean by the repo?
Not too sure.
Okay, so if you mean like that starting point that we provided, yep, that's exactly what I have here, right? The this is that same repo that we just looked at. Yeah, this thing right now. So I basically, well, I didn't clone it down because I created it locally and then pushed it up, but we could pretend that I cloned it down because it's the exact same thing, right? It's the exact same starting point. So one of the first things we could do is set up our virtual environment. Just make sure everything is running fine locally. Um, but yeah, Jeremy, you're right. Like we could also just start with Terraform. At this point, it's kind of optional, but I like to get the local stuff set up first. So let's start there. It's not going to take long. I am going to set up my virtual environment. So Python -m is for module. We're going to call the virtual environment module, and we're going to create a new folder for it. In this case, I'm just going to call it venv. It's going to create that environment. If I do an ls, we'll see that that environment is there. And now I can activate that environment. So source venv, then activate. Okay, this is where we should all be at right now. And now I can go into my Flask API directory. And I am going to pip install my requirements.txt.
So you want us to clone this down before we start and use the same one or build it up?
It's up to you. If it's there, if you think it's easier to just like start there, and if you've already got a good grasp on all of this from like a previous project, you could just build off that previous project. It's up to you. But yeah, if you are cloning it down, and just try to keep along. This is where we're at, and just let me know if I need to slow down.
Could you link it? I guess I opened up the tabs, but I don't know if I see the GHA pipeline.
Okay. Yeah, if we go to, yeah, I'll link it in the Slack. Okay, where is the Slack chat? Okay. So I'm also gonna go ahead and upgrade my package manager. And I think that's all I need to do right now. Um, And because we're not going to, we'll go back to adding the actual tests later on. Right now, I think I can get started on my Terraform. So I'm going to go back up one directory. I'm going to go into my infrastructure directory, and I'm going to make a Terraform subdirectory. I'm going to make a Terraform file, and I'm going to call it You can call it main.tf. Okay. So in our Terraform file, we're going to need some boilerplate code, right? Like our providers and whatnot. Kind of wish I included that. Oh, there's plenty of examples in the other repos, but I'll add a basic Terraform to this one as well. And we're just going to work off of the example that I've been building up, and that was the Feb3 demo, right? So, okay, right. We're going to start off with, actually, I wonder if this is in there. It should be in there, right? We'll close this. Okay, so it's not actually in this one, but we basically add a provider. We're going to add a Terraform block that specifies what version of the AWS provider we want. And we're going to add a remote backend. So I'm going to go ahead and include this already. You can use the class bucket, but if you do, just make sure you change this path, right? So I'm actually going to change it so it doesn't conflict with the other projects. I'm going to call this my Feb18 demo. So this is the path that gets created inside the bucket. If you want to use this, I'm also going to update the, like I said, I'm going to update this.
Hey,
to-
Julia,
Yeah, what's up?
I noticed you're using the S3 state lock feature and not the DynamoDB. So you guys figured out that that works pretty well for your backend, right?
Wait,
You know,
um, are you saying instead of?
right. I thought that before you guys were using the DynamoDB setup where you connected your S3 to DynamoDB for state locking.
Yeah, we still are.
Okay. I thought you were just using S3. I didn't see DynamoDB.
Oh, yeah, we're not quite there yet. So we are
Oh, I
referencing
see it.
DynamoDB table in our configuration here. But you're right, we haven't actually imported those resources yet. So inside the S3 bucket, this is that path, right? And the DynamoDB table is what's going to contain the lock. And if you want to use the existing S3 and DynamoDB table, should have added these as well. We could just use data blocks, right? Instead of resources. If you wanted to reuse resources, we would have to write import statements for them. And while that's generally okay, that can lead to a lot of potential conflicts if a lot of different users are sharing that same resource, right? So we're going to use the data source, the data block, instead of importing these. So I'm going to add that as well. Just want to make sure this isn't too confusing. I'm going to move EC2 down a bit into its own separate block. Okay, so that should all be available now. And this is going to be in the curriculum README. Okay. So with that, you should be able to utilize our existing setup. And from here, we can shoot. We can utilize a lot of the same roles and instance profiles that we had before. I could have sworn I changed these to use data, but I guess I might not have saved it. Okay, so let's just go ahead and yeah, let's just go ahead and write that out right now. So we're gonna make an IAM instance. Well, we're not gonna make, right? Because it's profile. We're gonna be searching for an existing resource. And I really don't know if I want to keep using this long, really long, crazy naming convention. I guess I will. Whoops. And this way, ads. I think this should be fine. And if it needs anything else, it should let me know. We want a profile for the instance, an IAM profile for the instance. We also want an IAM role so that it can execute any necessary EC2 related actions. So let's add AWS IAM role. I'm just going to call this, I guess I call it shared role. So we're going to look for the shared role. And specify its name. These names at all. Okay. And we're also going to want a policy. Policy is what defines the actual actions that we want, right? So things like our list bucket, get object, etc. Since it's already created, we don't need to type all of that out. We should just be good to go with calling the resource. So AWS IAM policy. It's called shared policy. Let's pass in the name. I'm going to test this. If it works, then I'll copy paste it into the repo as well. And I'm going to see if we need this. Let me go ahead and test this right now. Right, okay. So we're going to want to temporarily not mention this because we don't have this created yet, actually, right? So let's go ahead and init without it. We're going to need to migrate state. Right, okay. Okay, so basically this doesn't exist yet, so I can't access it, but I also can't access the data object. Wait, hold on, let me see. Why isn't it giving me the same? Also, let me think here. I have an alias. I don't remember this alias. I haven't used it in so long. Okay, I might just be under the wrong AWS profile. Okay. All right. So that should be good to go. Let me add this back in. Let me see if I can init without it. Okay. Back on track. So if you were running into the same issues I was, just double check to see that your environment, your terminal is set up to use the right account. Okay. So now I'm going to run a Terraform plan. It has successfully found all of these resources, so it is good to go. Just to make sure that we are good to go, I'm going to go ahead and do a Terraform apply. And we have no error messages. We are in a good place. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's get this up onto today's example. And okay, what do we want to do next? Let's go reference our README. We now want to, okay, I guess we want to set up we want to set up the EC2. So we're going to do that. We're going to also add some outputs so that when we call this EC2, I'm going to name it something better than this, Fab 18 demo. Okay, and the name of the key that we're using apparently. We can add some outputs so that when this gets created inside of GitHub Actions, we'll have our SSH command handy and ready to use. So what's happening here is basically outputs will just create a log inside of either the terminal or inside of GitHub Actions, depending on where it's being run. And it's just going to grab that instance that we've created, right? Our AWS instance. It's going to grab the IP address that gets generated. And just wondering why. These must be copy pasted from like different projects. Just want to double check. State. Okay, yeah. We want to make sure that these names match, and they don't match here, so that's no bueno. Let's go ahead and just make it very explicitly clear that these should match. My EC2, or better yet, I'm just going to reuse what was down here. CP DevOps evening and weekend Charlie. That's what's supposed to be here. We'll also add that here. So what's happening is, again, we create some outputs that will generate the IP address based off of the resource that we created, right? So that's where we're at now. And next, we'll want to add some additional resources that we're going to need. So things like a security group, right? And we can create a new resource. And if we wanted to do that, it would look something like this. And again, a lot of this should just be review right now because we've done this over and over. But it's good to have closing bracket. It's good to have a flow from the start of what we are doing to the end result without leaving anything out. So we're adding our security group. Again, we could just use what is it called? A data block instead if we wanted to do that. And I'm debating whether or not I should. Uh, I think I'm gonna leave it like this as a resource so I could demo what importing it is going to be like if you wanted to go that route. Because you might have your own security group that you've been using already, right? And while you could call that security group using a data block, if you wanted to make changes to it, you wouldn't be able to. You would have to import it first in order to make changes. And why might you want to make changes? If you end up deviating from this vanilla path, or if you end up adding things like Elasticsearch and Kibana, where you'll need to expose some additional ports that you may not have exposed already, then you'll want to go the import route, and I'll demo that inside of our GitHub Actions workflow. So I'm going to leave mine just like this as a resource. And I think that's everything I need now. Should be everything I need, right? From here, I can run another Terraform plan and apply. But instead of running it locally, I think we are good to start working on the workflow, but I don't want to jump around too much. So let me just do a Terraform plan instead. I'll just do that just to make sure that this is in a somewhat healthy state or a healthy state. Okay. So our security group has not been declared in the root module. That means something is trying to access something else that doesn't exist, right? So in line 55, right, these names have probably changed. Our outputs are trying to find an EC2 instance that doesn't exist. So let's change that. That's got to match. And actually, just for sake of specificity, I'm going to replace all of these references with my new name, because I want to give it a new name, Feb18 demo. And now I should be good to go. I'm going to save. And I am going to run my Terraform plan again. Still have some issues. Okay, now, right, the security group. Let's see. First off, I want to change this to February 18 security group. And I don't know if I need to move it up. I don't think it needs to be in any particular order. So if it complains, then I'll change it. Otherwise, I'll just leave it like this. Shoot. I can't just, okay, that should be the only thing referencing it. So I'm just going to change it there. Rerun my Terraform plan. Okay, I'm good to go. So I'm going to leave this as is. We are now done with our initial Flask setup. We are done with our initial Terraform setup. Let's now work on our workflow. So instead of testing these changes locally, we're going to test them inside of our GitHub Actions environment. And in order to do that, we're going to need a workflow. So let's go over to our workflows directory. Let's create a new workflow. Oh, and I guess I've already provided a starting point. Okay, so we have a starting point called a pipeline.yaml, and we could change the name because this looks like it hasn't been changed in a long time. It's referencing a very old iteration of this workflow. So I'm just going to call this GitHub, or actually app deployment pipeline. Okay, so you could change any of these values to whatever suits you. In my case, I'm just going to continue working off of a dev branch. This workflow dispatch will allow me to manually trigger the workflow from my environment. And while I may not necessarily have a need for that, if it does end up happening that I do need it, it's right there, it's available, right? So it's just a handy thing to have, especially if you're testing and you don't want to just go back and like make arbitrary changes just to push, right? So that's the first part of our config. No, nothing needs to change there really. We set some defaults. Now, if you start to deviate from this path, just make sure you're updating things like file names and folder directory paths to match whatever you actually have in your project. So mine is still using infra/tf, except it's not using create anymore. I did not do that. So I'm going to delete this and write the GitHub action step, or GitHub secrets step. We need these environment variables, right? And maybe not all of these. I think some of these are left over from a different project. So I don't think I need my access key ID. I don't think I need my secret access key either. Um, I don't even think I need both these SSH keys. If you've been using the same SSH key for everything, then that's great because it makes things simpler. I think I made the mistake of using a different SSH key for my GitHub account and for the EC2s. That's why I have that, but I'm gonna delete that just to simplify. And if you remember, we can add these secrets manually, or we could add them very quickly through our command line. So if I just want to make sure I'm in the right directory. I do a git GH for the GitHub command line, secret singular set. I can point to a file, and the file that I want is going to be in my SSH directory. And I think I've been using the RSA 2025. So I have to use a redirect, I believe. Well, actually, let me try this. Okay. Let me also make sure. Okay, ID underscore RSA 2025. Oh, I have an extra A in there. Okay, so you just saw my secret key. If I do GH secret list, I believe. Ooh, no secrets found. So that means it didn't actually add it. If I was adding from an environment variables file, then I would use the -f with that file name. But if I wanted to just add from like an SSH key, for example, I don't use -f. I want to, I'm just like misremembering the syntax for this. Let me run a help on this, and there we go. That's what I want. I have to define the secret that I want to add first, right? Okay, so what is the secret? It is SSH key, like in all caps, right? Or SSH private key. So let me do a GH secret set SSH underscore private key. And then I am going to take the contents of my ID RSA and I'm going to use a redirect to pass that into the SSH private key. So let's hit enter. Looks like it succeeded. If we do a secret list, we can see that my SSH private key has been added. All right. Now that we've got that set up, I'm specifying the region I want. I'm going to leave it like that. We definitely want to have write permissions enabled, read for contents. And now we can start reviewing our actual workflow. So I named my first job provision infrastructure because that's what it's doing. It's using Terraform to set up my EC2. We use GitHub Actions checkout to give the workspace access to the repository. We set up Terraform in that workspace, and we can then run init, plan, and apply. I don't think this is actually necessary right now, given what's inside of our Terraform file. There is an example later on where you can use remote exec to exec into your EC2 once it's been made to run some starter code. That's when you would want to pass in your private key because you'll need that private key in order to SSH using remote exec, right? So I'm going to delete it from here because I don't need it. It really doesn't hurt to leave it, so I guess I'll leave it here and you can see um, differences inside of the logs if there are any. And then we have a step for installing Ansible because I'm at least going to use Ansible. And again, I highly recommend using Ansible for your project, but you don't have to. You can use one of the other methods like using SSH or SCP actions through GitHub Actions to run any kind of environment setup code that needs to be run. Okay, so once that is set up, it's going to run a playbook. This playbook doesn't actually exist yet, so I'm going to delete it because it's going to fail if I do that. And I don't want to do this right now either, right? Because I don't actually need Ansible right now until that playbook is done. So I can use this block here if colon false to essentially disable the job. Kind of like the same thing as just commenting it out, I guess, but a little cleaner. It's gonna list the job, or I should say the step of this job inside of our logs, but it's gonna show that it's gonna skip it. So that's what I'm gonna do with this. I'm gonna set it to skip. And now we're gonna set up our next job, right? And our next job is to set up some tests for our Flask API. Okay, how's everyone doing? Everyone more or less on the in the same place? And let me know if I'm like just going, if I'm doing like way too much review over old
Uh,
stuff.
between lines 62 and 64, did you say you deleted the Ansible playbook?
Oh yeah, the command for the playbook, because this is left over from the previous project. I think it was just an oversight on my part. So I didn't include this playbook, right? So this playbook doesn't exist, neither does this inventory file. If you left this in here, it's going to fail because it's going to try to run this command and it can't find those things.
Okay.
I'd rather just delete it and we'll just rewrite it later on once we actually know what we've named our inventory and playbook files. Okay, so let me also, let me think. It's not going to hurt to leave this in here. So we should actually be good to go to test this. So I'm going to add everything. I'm at my root directory, so I could just use the present working directory symbol to add everything. We see that everything has been added. We see some stuff that shouldn't be in there. Yikes. I guess I don't have a git ignore. So I am going to remove the stuff that should not be in there. So anything that's like .terraform, right? Because that's going to be a lot of space, a lot of file space that we do not need. So I'm going to remove, oh shoot. I'm going to remove everything that starts with .terraform. Uh, and I'm going to try to do this forcefully. So, okay, so that's that. I'm going to go ahead and make my git ignore. I'll add it later on. Could have sworn I had a starting. Oh, I do have a starting git ignore. Okay. So I do have a git ignore and it just doesn't have Terraform, right? So let's go ahead and make sure we have Terraform specified in here. So anything that starts with .terraform needs to be ignored. And that should be good for now. We might have to. I'm just gonna add this. And if it's redundant, it's redundant. It's not gonna hurt. Uh, now, if I have whatever reason, those files in the future, they should not be added to the commit. And I'm actually gonna go, well, no, I'll do that later. I feel like I'm jumping around way too much already. We could delete those files because we no longer need them. Now that we are running this inside of GitHub Actions workflow, we don't need our local Terraform state files. So I can delete those, but I'll delete those later on. Now I want to just go ahead and test this. So I'm going to add my last change. I'm going to make a commit, and I'm going to pass in a message, initial workflow run. And I am going to push to whatever branch I specified. I think it was dev, but I might not already be in dev. Let's see. Make a dev branch. Push to that branch. Oh shoot, I'm using that same repo, aren't I? I should have forked this before making these changes. But anyway, ooh, we have a failure already. So no valid credential sources found. Aha, yes, okay. Let's see if we can expand this. Nope. Okay. So it's telling us that we failed to get the API token, and so it's not happy. So we have to use, what was I using? It's trying to, oh, actually, I guess this is why we do need the SSH key, but let's go back to our pipeline.yaml. Let's go back to that variable SSH key that I deleted, and let's re-add that. Thinking I might still be missing something because I deleted some things from here as well. So let me just double check my previous project. Oh, right. I do need the, wait, no, for Terraform. Yeah, I do need these. So let me add the AWS access key ID and secret access key. I don't know where you have yours stored, but I have mine stored inside an environment file. So let me make sure I am referencing the right one. And is it this? Nope, that's it. Yep, that's it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do my GH. Oh shit, give me a sec. Okay, sorry about that. Got a new dog and he's being a punk. Okay. Let's see. Right. I am using GH repo, or sorry, secret set. And now I want to use a -f to add from a file. And the file that I'm adding from is in my SSH directory. And it was called AWS Access. And because it's an environment file, it's got the right syntax and formatting, it's added our secrets to the repo. And let me just think. I shouldn't need this until I'm ready to SSH. Okay. Terraform, setting up the, yeah, I should be good. So let me do, I don't really have any changes to make. And I just want to rerun this. So I'm just going to go ahead and rerun, either do all jobs or failed jobs. I'm just going to go ahead and rerun jobs here. Oh, did I not save? I'm a derp. I didn't save. I do have changes that I have to push. update add AWS creds. I'm gonna push to my dev branch, and it's gonna trigger a rerun. Okay, now it failed for another reason. Security token, including the request, is invalid. I don't know right now if this is the right, these are the right AWS keys. Let's see. Okay, if you're following along, let me know if you have your access set up correctly and that you're able to get past this step. And I'm gonna have to try to figure out which one of these. Shoot. That's Cloudflare. Let's see. Let's be in here. All my credentials on screen. Sorry, give me a sec. Yeah, these are different keys. So what I'm gonna do is, oh no, there are multiple ones in here. I'm gonna, shoot, I can't do that either. Okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna update these inside of GitHub Actions UI. And I'm gonna hope that these are the right ones. Okay. If I don't get this right, then we could we could skip it for now and move on to the actual testing setup. Okay. Did my EID, now getting my secret access key. And hopefully these are the right ones. Okay. Where is... I definitely should have forked this first. You definitely want to fork the repo instead of cloning it so that your secrets aren't stored in the source repository that's shared by everybody, right? Oh, and of course, we never added this, so we don't want that. I really should have just left it out. Added it back in, do that. Whoops. And yeah, let's get rid of that here. Let's get rid of this here. Just clear these screens. No, that's not what I want. Let that run. All right, so we're really just trying to confirm that we're still in a good place, that our flow will successfully build. And this should pass because all it's doing really is setting up Python and adding work directory. So we could start to expand on this while we wait for the results of this latest run. So let's go back to our repo and our curriculum repo, and let's look through what it wants us to do next. We did all this. We added to our Terraform an EC2 and a security group. Right. We'll see if it throws an error at that point where it tries to create the security group. I don't think it's going to because I changed the name. And if I didn't change the name, then it should throw an error. And right, we're still gonna set up remote. Oh no, we did this. We did this. We did this. If you run into an issue with your import step later on, which you might once you set up your remote backend, because if it's already been exported, or sorry, imported, and the state is saved to the backend, then it's going to throw an error saying this has already been imported. And so we could update our conditional check to say if it's already imported, then just print out this message. Otherwise, we run the import command. Okay. So now our test environment. We are going to set up some really simple tests. Okay. And we already have some boilerplate code that we could run tests on. We have a user model that has an ID, a username, and an email, and we have routes for our Flask API. We have a user's route, which will let us get all the users, as well as a home route and a health check route. So we could write some tests just to confirm that these routes work, right? But first, we have to configure our test environment, and we could do that really easily with PyTest because all we have to do is configure it to recognize the application, right? So we're going to make a file called conftest.py. And let's see. In our Flask API, we're going to make a new directory. And we're going to call it tests. Whoops, why did I do that? And inside of tests, we're going to make our conf test.py. And we're just going to grab what's in here. And let's just step through what's happening. We're importing PyTest, so we could use the PyTest fixtures. We define the app that we want to use, and this is basically going to be our app from the app directory. So inside of our Flask API app directory, where we have app, we've created a Flask app object, right? And that's what we're importing. So, or simulating, I guess it's a better way of putting it. So we also then set up these configurations. Everything should essentially match our actual application code, right? Including a URI. Now for our simple tests, this may not be absolutely necessary, but later on when we want to expand on those tests, it will be. So for now, we are just adding an additional fixture to act as the app client, and we could import this within our tests. So we'll write our first test, so test underscore routes.py. And let's just copy this, let's paste it in. Oh, this is missing something. We have to, I think we just import PyTest. Let me double check. Oh, we have to import logging as well. Makes sense. Yeah, I think we're also going to need this. And let me just confirm that this is all we need. So inside of our root directory for our project, our Flask API project specifically, we can run the PyTest module, and we pass in our test directory. So python-m PyTest tests. And we are getting some import errors. Oh, I think we're going to need that's what I got for changing things up. Yeah, so originally we had like way more files, like an init, a dunder init dunder.py, just where we were importing the create app from. Now we've changed it to this combined format. Okay. So we don't actually have a create app method. So I'm going to, yeah, I'm just gonna change this up. So we're gonna need that exact same format. Anything else could be stay the same. So let's comment this out for now. I think with our init, config, and database, we should be good. Let's run this again. Okay, we have one failure, and I think that might be because I don't have. I did install my requirements.txt. Remember I did that. Um, inside of our tests, try to import logging in PyTest, but it's not being. Oh, because I think we're missing texture. Or no, we're missing this. Okay. Now let's try running our test, and our test succeeds. So I'll add all this to this README because that was missing. Commit our changes. And okay, if this succeeds here, it should succeed in our workflow. And so all we have to do now is just add any remaining steps in the workflow that we don't already have, right? So let's go back to our workflow. Where we left off was we show our present working directory. From here, we're going to want to add some additional steps, like installing our dependencies. And we want to basically run a multi-line command, so we use pipe. And we are going to do our Python pip install upgrade pip. Need to use -m to call the pip module. And we then want to pip install our requirements. And then we just want to run a few more commands, one to verify the installation of PyTest and one to actually run the tests, right? So let's add those. Let's check on our status. Got a bunch of things to add. Let's commit. Let's check on. Ooh, I think we had another failure. DevOps Charlie does not exist. Okay. I thought that key pair looked odd. So I'm gonna go back to my working Terraform, make sure I'm actually referencing the right key pair for the EC2. Right, we've been using CP class students. Okay, so we got to use CP class students. And oh, it's even using it in all of the output commands. Okay, so I've got to change that to side of not this one, but right. So we replace this with the right key. Let's see. Yep, it was already using CP class students and output commands. Okay. And I think this is where we have to I'm just wondering if I have to add my other key. I can't remember which key is what. Um, yeah, I think this is I think AWS in my case, private key refers to that CP class key. So I need to add another secret. I've got to find that actual thing. Let's do an ls or LSA. Oh, right. If it's just that one file, then I can do my GH secret set. The environment variable is going to be called AWS SSH private key. I'm going to grab from the SSH directory cbclassstudent.pem. Okay. Just making sure I'm not missing anything else. I guess while we're here, no, let's wait until this is actually running. Okay, we're gonna add a few more steps. We're gonna want these files inside of our GitHub Actions workflow runner environment. So before we run our Terraform commands, we're going to write from our GitHub secrets into some files. Okay, so in my case, I'm taking my SSH private key and I'm passing it into an ID RSA. And I'm passing the AWS SSH key to an ID RSA 2025. And when I run my Terraform commands, we're passing in the original ID RSA. Okay, so now I can add these back in because these now exist. And let's add our changes. Oops. It's okay. I think I forgot a step. My SSH key path. Oh, okay. So let's go back to our Terraform because we forgot one more thing. We need to specify the SSH private key path in order to be able to use it. And I'm just going to add that around here. Okay. Now let's see if this runs. Okay. So far, so good. Our plan succeeded. It's now running its supply and I'm wondering if Add anything else? I guess I didn't show this yet, the importing of the security groups, but I'm waiting to see some results. I want to see if I get an error specifically related to this. It looks like I'm not, again, because I think I changed the name of the security group. So next time I run this, it might fail because it might try to recreate that security group and it's not going to like it. So when we see that error finally, then I'll add it. Right now, we are setting up our tests. We are running the test and running into an error inside of our contest.py. So let's see why. Maybe because we changed some things around again. No, actually, that doesn't look bad at all. So it's telling us can't find create app, no module named app. This might be where we need the shoot. Forgot the blank init underscore not py. So even though it's empty, Python needs this in order to initialize the contents of this directory. So let's go make that empty file. Save. We are almost there. How's everyone doing?
Is this gonna be
Be
updated?
updated.
Yeah, oh, yes. Okay, let me see. What are the updates? Um, let me know if I've already kind of forgotten. I've been trying to update on the go, but I know I kind of like deviated. So let's see. I'm definitely going to be removing my secrets from this. Uh, we want to fix our tests, right? Right. So let's go ahead. Let's add some. I don't want to do like this. Way too much stuff to do. Uh, right. I can just push everything to main. So let me go over to my main directory or branch. I'm going to do a git merge from the dev branch, push origin main, and okay, we should have the files that we need. This should all be commented out, so I can just delete that from the repo as well. And let's see where we're at with the latest run. Okay, cool. So this succeeded. We finally have the running of the tests because of it failed because of some bizarre Python magic, but now we caught it and we fixed it, and now everything is hunky-dory. We have a test that is being run and being passed. So we are now in a good state to continue adding routes, adding models, adding to our configs. And so tomorrow, you'll get started on expanding on the Terraform. It's so hard to navigate these. And oh, that's really throwing me off. And let's see. Right, so now you get to add some steps for running Docker commands, and Reno should walk through a few different ways of doing that. You could either use actions like Docker actions for using build X. You could manually run these Docker commands if Docker exists in the image that you're using. And you will then push an image either to Docker Hub or the container registry. You'll then also deploy the application by pulling it down on the EC2 using one of these methods. And if you don't want to use any of these methods, then you could write a playbook for it. And then on Thursday, you should be able to test a big portion of it and hopefully wrap up by the end of the day. If you have time, there are stretch goals listed in the assignment. So our main objectives are to make at least one workflow, run Terraform commands in your GitHub Actions environments, set up an EC2, add some monitoring and logging in your pipeline, set up a database using your preferred method, and automate the startup and running of your application on the EC2. It's got to be publicly accessible. And that is essentially everything you'll need to be able to repeat in the assessment 3. And it's also essentially what you're going to be doing again in your capstone projects. Okay, any questions? Oh, my camera's been off all this time. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead, open up some rooms, and I'll check in with everyone. We'll all check back in at 9. How's that sound?
Okay.
Cool.